There is a specific kind of silence that falls over a military chow hall when someone decides to make an example out of someone else. It is not the silence of shock. It is the silence of anticipation. Every man in that room has seen this before. A senior guy spots fresh meat, sizes him up, decides the new guy needs to learn where he stands before he even picks up a fork. It is a ritual as old as uniforms themselves, the loud man, the quiet man, and, the moment one of them walks away smaller than he arrived. Most of the time, the new guy shrinks. Most of the time. But, every once in a long while, the wrong man gets chosen. Not the wrong man because he is dangerous, though he is. The wrong man because he has already survived things that would have made the loud man quit on day one. The wrong man because the things meant to shake him cannot reach him anymore. He has been underwater in the dark. He has held his breath past the point where the body screams to stop. He has been broken down in ways that do not leave visible marks, rebuilt into something that does not rattle. The Marine did not know any of that when he sat down across from Staff Sergeant Daniel Rhett. He just saw a quiet guy eating alone. He thought quiet meant soft. He was about to learn the hard way, in front of everyone, exactly what quiet actually means when it comes from a man wearing a trident. Camp Lejeune in July was its own kind of punishment. The heat came off the asphalt in visible waves, the kind that made the air ahead of you look like it was lying, like the ground itself was trying to trick you into believing things that were not there. The trees did not move. The sky was a flat white sheet pressed down on everything. Even the bugs seemed too hot to bother anyone. Staff Sergeant Daniel Rhett had been on base for exactly 4 days. He was there on a joint training rotation, a temporary assignment where Navy SEALs and Marine units did a 2-week program together, exchanging tactics, building interoperability, the kind of military cooperation that looked excellent on paper and, in reality, mostly meant two groups of extremely proud men sizing each other up for the first 48 hours before anything useful got done. It was normal. Expected. Every operator who had ever done a joint rotation knew the dance. You came in quiet. You let the other branch run their mouth a little. You did your job. After a few days, the chest beating slowed and actual work started. Rhett had been through this before. More than once. He knew the rhythm of it. What he had not expected was Corporal Marcus Dill. Dill was 26 years old and, built like someone had stacked a series of angry rectangles on top of each other and, then, given the whole structure a jarhead haircut. He was not the biggest Marine on base. He was not even close to the most decorated. But, he had something that certain men in certain environments develop over time, a gravitational pull built entirely out of volume and confidence and the specific social intelligence required to dominate a group of men who respect domination. He knew how to read a room. He knew how to find the new guy. And, he was very, very good at making himself look impressive by making someone else look small. He had been doing it for years. Nobody had ever pushed back hard enough to make him stop. The chow hall at Camp Lejeune was the kind of place that could seat 300 men and still feel like it was always just a little too crowded. Long metal tables. Plastic trays. The smell of industrial scrambled eggs that had been sitting under a heat lamp since before most of the men eating them had finished their morning PT. It was loud in the way that military chow halls are always loud, voices bouncing off hard surfaces, the clatter of silverware, the particular cadence of men who spend all day being yelled at relaxing by yelling at each other, but in a friendly way. Dill walked in at 0715 with 4 of his guys. He was already talking. He was always already talking. They loaded their trays and moved through the hall and Dill's eyes were doing what they always did at scanning, categorizing, looking for something interesting. A new face. A reason to perform. He spotted Rhett at a corner table. Rhett was eating alone. Tray in front of him, fork moving at a steady pace, eyes forward. He was not looking around. He was not trying to signal anything to anyone. He was just eating breakfast the way a man eats breakfast when breakfast is fuel and nothing else. He had a plain green t-shirt on, no rank insignia visible, no patches, nothing to immediately announce who or what he was. He looked, from across the room, like a guy who had shown up and sat down and did not particularly care about impressing anyone. To Dill, that read as an invitation. He changed direction toward Rhett's table. His four guys followed, because they always followed. They had the look of men who had been in this scene before, slightly amused, slightly wary, mostly ready to laugh at whatever was about to happen. They sat down around the table with the easy confidence of people who own the room they're sitting in. Dill put his tray down across from Rhett with the particular thud of a man announcing himself. Rhett looked up. Looked at Dill. Looked back down at his food. That look, the look down, was enough. Navy? Dill said. Not as a greeting. As a statement of mildly amused contempt, the way you might identify a species of insect you had encountered before and did not think much of. Yeah, Rhett said. Still eating. What branch? There was a beat. Rhett chewed, swallowed, took a sip of his coffee. NSW, he said. Naval Special Warfare. He did not elaborate. Dill smiled. It was the kind of smile that had a whole speech behind it. So what, you one of those SEAL guys? That what you are? Yep, Rhett said. The table around Dill's crew had gone slightly quieter. Not dramatically. Just enough. The men nearest them had developed the particular casual inattentiveness of people who are absolutely paying attention. Dill leaned forward. This was his move, the lean. It ate up space. It pushed the physical boundary of the table and made the other person feel the approach of it. Most guys, when Dill leaned like that, leaned back. Or straightened. Or did something with their face that told him they felt it. Rhett did not lean back. He just kept eating. You know what's funny, Dill said, now speaking at a volume that was clearly not just for Rhett, is I always heard SEAL training was this insane impossible thing. But, then, I meet you guys and, it's like, what exactly were they testing for? Because some of you don't look like much. A couple of his guys laughed. Quiet, controlled laughs. The kind calibrated to encourage without being loud enough to commit to a scene if the scene went sideways. Rhett set his fork down. He did not do it with anger. Did not do it with drama. He set it down the way a man sets down a tool he is temporarily finished using. Then, he looked at Dill. Actually looked at him, the full, unblinking attention of someone who has decided to be present in a conversation. What unit are you with? Rhett asked. Dill blinked. He had not expected a question. He had expected the other guy to squirm a little, or laugh it off nervously, or fire something back that Dill could immediately knock down. A question was different. A question put Dill in the position of answering instead of attacking. 2nd Battalion, 7th Marines, Dill said. He said it with pride because it deserved pride. 2nd Bat was no joke. They had deployed, they had seen action, they were hard men doing real work. Rhett nodded slowly. Good outfit, he said. And, the way he said it, without enthusiasm, without condescension, just as a plain statement of fact, communicated something that Dill could not quite put his finger on but felt in his chest somewhere. What about you? Dill said, pushing again. How many deployments? 5, Rhett said. The table went quiet. Not performance quiet. Actually quiet. Because 5 combat deployments for a SEAL was not a resume point. It was a life. It was roughly a decade of going in and coming back and going in again, and the toll of that was something every man at that table understood even if they had never experienced it themselves. One of Dill's guys, a lance corporal named Ferris who was smart enough to read the room, looked down at his food. But Dill was not built for retreat. Retreat was not in his vocabulary. He had a reputation to maintain, and, for guys watching him, and a chow hall that had gotten slightly too quiet, and the only direction he knew how to go in that situation was forward. 5 deployments, he said, and he smiled, but it was a different smile now, tighter, slightly performative, the smile of a man who is committed to a bit and cannot stop mid-execution. Man, and you're still a staff sergeant? 5 deployments and you haven't moved up? What happened? They keep forgetting to promote you, or you just not good enough to. I turned it down, Rhett said. Silence. Not the silence of the whole chow hall. Just the immediate silence of that table and the 3 tables close enough to have been following the conversation, which was most of them. Dill stared at him. You turned down a promotion. 3 times, Rhett said. He picked his fork back up. I like where I am. I like doing the job. Once you move up, the job changes. I didn't want a different job. He went back to eating. As if the conversation had ended. As if whatever Dill did next was simply not that interesting. And that the going back to eating was the thing that cracked something open in the room. Because Dill had started this to make Rhett look small. And, somewhere in the last 45 seconds, without raising his voice, without flexing, without performing a single thing, Rhett had managed to make Dill's promotions feel like evidence of ambition rather than ability. Had managed to make his own rank feel like a choice. Had reframed the entire conversation without Dill even seeing it happen. Dill's jaw tightened. His guys were very carefully not looking at him. He was not done. He was stubborn in the way that men who have never truly lost are stubborn, with the absolute conviction that the next move would fix it. That if he could just find the right angle, the right jab, he could still walk away from this the way he walked away from everything else. He leaned forward again. Closer this time. All right, Seal, he said, voice dropping, the volume shift of a man who has decided to get personal, let me ask you something. All that hell week stuff. All that surf torture, hold your breath, ring the bell, you think that actually makes someone better? Or is it just a hazing ritual with better PR? Rhett chewed. Swallowed. Looked at Dill with an expression that was not anger and was not amusement and was not contempt. It was something much harder to read and much more unsettling. It was patience. The patience of a man who has sat with worse than this and not moved. You ever been hypothermic? Rhett asked. Dill said nothing. Not cold, Rhett said. Hypothermic. Where your hands stop working. Where you're shaking so hard your teeth split the inside of your cheek and you don't notice. Where the only reason you're still moving is because stopping means dying and dying means you didn't finish. He paused. Let that sit there in the air between them. You've been through hard things, Rhett said. He was not asking. He was acknowledging. Your training isn't soft. Marines go through real things. I'm not saying that. Another pause. But, when you ask if it makes someone better, the point isn't the cold. The point is you find out, with no doubt left, exactly where your off switch is. Exactly what it takes to make you quit. And, then, you prove you can go past it. He looked at Dill calmly. Most people never find out where their off switch is. They think they know. They don't. He picked up his coffee. I found mine, he said. 3 times. Kept going anyway. The chow hall had, without anyone planning it, become very quiet. Dill sat there. His hands were on the table. His jaw was still tight. His guys were absolutely, completely, 100% looking at their food. He had come to this table to make a new guy feel small. He had sat down with the comfortable assumption that quiet meant soft, that sitting alone meant weak, that a man who did not announce himself had nothing to announce. He had been wrong about all of it. And he was starting to understand slowly, and not pleasantly, just how wrong. He was not done, though. Not yet. There was one more move he thought he had. He just did not know yet that making it would be the last mistake of the morning. The thing about men like Marcus Dill is that they are not stupid. That is the part people get wrong when they hear stories like this one. They imagine the loud man as the dumb man, the bully as someone without self-awareness, the performer as someone who cannot read a room. But Dill read the room just fine. He could feel the weight of the silence around that table. He could see it in his guys, the slight withdrawal of Ferris, the way Torres had suddenly become very interested in his orange juice, the absence of the easy confirming laughter that usually followed his moves. He knew he was losing ground. He knew Rhett had taken 3 hits and not moved an inch, and that the coffee line where he had started this as the loudest man in the room was a long way behind him now. He knew all of it. The problem was, knowing it and being able to stop were 2 entirely different things. Dill had spent 4 years building a reputation that rested on a very simple foundation. He was the man who never backed down, never got rattled, never left a table having lost. That reputation was not just social. It was load-bearing. It was the thing that kept his guys in line, that made the junior Marines defer to him, that gave him the air of someone who could not be touched. The moment he stood up from that table without drawing blood, without landing something, without walking away with something to show for it, he would spend the next 10 days watching that reputation develop a crack that everyone could see but no one would mention directly. So he leaned in again. One more time. He changed tactics. The facts had not worked. The jabs had not worked. The volume had not worked. So he went somewhere different. He went personal. "You know what I heard," he said, lowering his voice to the register of a man sharing something, "is that you SEAL guys come back and you're not right. Like, the training breaks something in your head. Guys can't sleep. Can't hold a marriage together. Can't function in a normal room without looking for exits." He tilted his head slightly. 5 deployments. "You doing all right, man?" Genuinely asking. It was vicious in the particular way that men who are losing sometimes get vicious, cloaking an attack in the language of concern. Weaponizing mental health. Framing the question so that whatever Rhett said next, the implication was already in the room: this man might be damaged. This man might not be well. Don't respect him. Pity him. The table went completely still. Even Ferris looked up. Not because he approved of the move, his expression was actually uncomfortable, the look of a man who has just watched someone do something he knows is a mistake and cannot stop it. Rhett set his coffee down. He looked at Dill for a long moment. Not a reactive look. The look of someone taking time to decide what this moment actually deserved. "Yeah," Rhett said. "I'm doing all right." He said it flatly. Without defensiveness. Without the slight elevation in pitch that would have told Dill the shot had landed. It came out at the same exact temperature as everything else he had said, and that temperature, that complete, unshifting steadiness, was the most disorienting thing Dill had encountered in the entire conversation. He had thrown a lit match and the other man had not even looked at it. "I do check all the boxes," Rhett continued, still in the same quiet, even voice. "Sleep issues, yeah. Loud rooms, yeah. I've been through enough that some of it stayed." He was looking at Dill directly. "But here's the thing about that, and I'm going to give you this one for free, Corporal, because you seem like you actually might want to hear something real today." He paused. "The guys who can't function after? The ones who are actually broken by it? They were not broken by the enemy. They were broken by what they had to carry alone. Because the people around them back home, on base, in chow halls, decided that asking whether someone was okay was a weapon to use rather than a question to mean." He let that sentence land exactly where it was aimed. "You didn't ask how I was doing because you care," Rhett said. "We both know that. So let's not pretend." He picked his fork back up. Dill's ears were red. Not just the tips. The full redness of a man whose blood has gone to his face because something has reached him past his defenses, past the performance, past the reputation, and touched something real underneath. Because Rhett had done something Dill had not prepared for. He had refused to fight. He had refused to shrink. And he had also refused to let Dill be invisible in his own cruelty. He had named exactly what Dill had done, calmly and, without heat, in front of every man at the table. There was nowhere to go with that. Nowhere rhetorical, anyway. Which was when Dill made his last mistake. He stood up. He did it slowly, the way men who have committed to something physical stand up, deliberate, projecting mass, bringing his full 6'2" to bear because the conversation was no longer working and he had one register left: size. He put his hands on the table and leaned over it and looked down at Rhett and said, "Why don't we take this outside, Haas?" It was not exactly a threat. It was the suggestion of a threat. The implication of one. The kind of statement designed to produce a response from the audience around them, a shift in energy, an escalation, a visible acknowledgement that Dill still had cards and, one of them was the physical one and everyone in the room knew what he meant. Rhett looked up at him. He did not stand. Did not push his tray back. Did not change his posture in any way that would telegraph anything to anyone watching. He just looked at Dill the way a man looks at weather. "Sit down, Marcus," he said. "Not Corporal. Marcus." The first name, said quietly, without performance, functioned like a hand placed on the chest. Not a push. A stop. Dill blinked. Nobody called him Marcus on base. He was Dill. He was Corporal. He was "Hey man, hey bro." The first name in that tone, the specific tone of someone who has already made a calculation and found it uninteresting, did something to the air around the table. "I'm not going to fight you," Rhett said. "Not because I couldn't. And not because I'm scared of what happens next. But because you haven't actually done anything worth my time yet. You've been performing for your guys for the last 10 minutes and I've just been eating breakfast." He took a sip of coffee. "If you want to keep going, you can. I'll still be here when you're done." There was a moment, a real, suspended moment, where the room held its breath. Dill stood there over the table. Standing was supposed to change things. Standing was supposed to rearrange the math of the situation, bring gravity back to his side. But, standing over a man who has not flinched, who has not stood himself, who has not reacted with anything that looks even slightly like alarm, standing just made Dill look like he was waiting for something that was never going to arrive. Ferris quietly stood up. Not aggressively. He just stood, put a hand on Dill's arm, and said, "Hey, Corporal. You got PT in 20. It was the off-ramp. The diplomatic exit disguised as a schedule reminder." Ferris was smart enough to know when a situation needed one. Dill did not move for another 3 seconds. 3 seconds is a long time when everyone in a chow hall is watching. Then, he straightened. Picked up his tray. Did not look at Rhett again. "Enjoy your breakfast," he said. He made it sound like a dismissal, but the tightness in his jaw gave it away. It was the voice of a man ending a conversation because he needed to end it, not because he had finished with it. He walked away. His guys followed. Torres and Ferris and the others moved with the particular energy of men who were not discussing what just happened because discussing it would mean naming it, and naming it would make it permanent. The chow hall noise came back up. Not all at once. In stages. First the tables immediately around the corner where Rhett was sitting. Then, the middle of the room. Then, the far side, where people had not actually heard the conversation but had felt the pressure of it change and were now feeling it decompress. Rhett finished his eggs. He drank the rest of his coffee. He stacked his silverware on his tray the way every service member does, automatically, without thinking, the muscle memory of 1,000 dining facilities on a dozen different bases. He stood, carried his tray to the return window, and walked out into the flat white July heat without looking back. He had not won a fight. He had not been in a fight. He had eaten breakfast. But, the story of what happened at that corner table traveled through Camp Lejeune at the specific velocity that good stories always travel through military bases, fast, and, with each retelling gaining a few small details that made it better, sharper, truer in the way that matters more than accuracy. By lunchtime, the story had reached the platoon bays. By afternoon PT, 3 different people who had not been in the chow hall were telling it as if they had been standing right there. Dill heard it by 1400. Heard it from Torres, who had been there, and who told it the same way he had lived it, quietly, factually, without editorializing, which was somehow worse than if he had been cruel about it. Facts delivered without editorial have their own brutality. Dill said nothing when Torres finished. He just nodded and went back to checking his gear. But, that evening, something changed in him. Something that had been running on a single track for the last 4 years, the track of performance, of reputation, of being the loudest voice in every room as a substitute for something he had never quite let himself look at directly, something on that track shifted. Not dramatically. Not the way it shifts in movies, with music and a close-up and a moment of obvious realization. It shifted the way real things shift in real people, slowly, uncomfortably, like something that has been sitting wrong finally, settling into a different position. He thought about what Rhett had said. Not the parts about SEAL training. Not the 5 deployments. The part about what breaks men. The part about asking whether someone is okay as a weapon instead of a question. About carrying things alone because the people around you decided concern was ammunition. Dill had done that. He had taken something real, the actual reality that combat veterans struggle, that the transition costs something, that the people who go the most times come back carrying the most weight, and he had tried to use it as a blade. He had aimed it at a man he did not know, in a room full of people, for an audience that had not asked for it. He sat with that for a while. The Marine Corps had made him many things. Hard. Reliable. Genuinely brave in ways he did not need to perform because the real tests had already proven it. But, somewhere along the way, in the specific culture of a unit that respected only dominance, he had confused loudness for strength. Had confused making someone else smaller for making himself bigger. Rhett had not done any of that. Rhett had just sat there and been exactly what he was, without apology, without performance, without the need for any of it. And Dill could not stop thinking about how light that looked. He did not go looking for Rhett that evening. He was not there yet. The thing that had shifted in him was not big enough yet to override 4 years of pride in a single afternoon. But it was there. It was real. And it was about to grow considerably in the next 48 hours when, during the joint training exercise the following morning, Marcus still found himself in a situation where the only man who could get them all out was the quiet SEAL who had eaten breakfast without looking up. The exercise was called Iron Corridor. It was a 2-day joint training simulation set in the military training complex north of the main base, a collection of decommissioned buildings, fake village infrastructure, and carefully constructed terrain that had been used for urban warfare rehearsals since the late 90s. The buildings were real. The walls were real. The distances between them, the roof lines, the choke points, the alley widths, all of it was real. What was not real was the ammunition. Simunition rounds only. Blue paint markers instead of bullets. The pain was real, though. Getting hit with a simunition round from 10 feet felt like being stung by a very large and extremely committed hornet, and grown men in full kit had been known to yelp in ways they later denied. The scenario was straightforward on paper. A Joint Element 8 Marines, for Navy SEALs, had to move through a contested urban block, extract a notional high-value target from a building in the center of the complex, and exfil through a designated corridor while an opposing force cadre tried to stop them. The opposing force knew the terrain intimately. They had been running this scenario for 3 years. They were very good at it. The joint element had never operated together before 2 days ago. Which was, of course, exactly the point. The briefing happened at 0600 in a plywood structure that smelled like old coffee and dry erase markers. The commanding officer for the exercise, a lieutenant colonel named Hargrove who had the kind of face that had been sunburned so many times it had simply given up and stayed permanently red, laid out the scenario with the specific crispness of a man who does not enjoy wasting words. Movement orders. ROE for the exercise. COM protocols. Exfil window. He assigned the element leader, a Marine captain named Stokes, capable, experienced, the right choice, and he laid out the division of roles. The SEALs would handle point and breach. The Marines would cover the exfil corridor and maintain the perimeter. Rhett was assigned to point. Dill was assigned to the northwest perimeter. They had not spoken since the chow hall. The element moved out at 0730 into a morning that had somehow figured out how to be even hotter than the day before. The training complex smelled like concrete and dry grass and old paint. The kind of smell that does not exist anywhere except military training environments and that every person who has ever worked in one will recognize for the rest of their life, even decades later, even in completely different context. The first 90 minutes went well. They moved through the outer ring of buildings without significant contact. The opposing force had set up a screen about 400 meters in a blocking position designed to channel the element into a specific alley where the bulk of the cadre would be waiting. It was a standard funneling technique, well executed, and it might have worked perfectly against a less experienced group. But Rhett read it before they hit it. He called a halt 30 meters from the entrance to the alley. No voice command, hand signal, flat and sharp, the kind of signal that travels through a unit without sound and lands with the weight of a shout. The element stopped. Captain Stokes moved up to Rhett's position. "They're staged in there," Rhett said quietly. He did not explain at length how he knew. He had just been doing this long enough that certain things had a texture to them, the absence of movement in a space where there should be movement, the angle of shadows through a window that suggested a body behind the frame, the particular quality of waiting that trained men produce even when they are trying not to. "If we funnel in, we're going to get hit from 3 directions before we can breach the target building." Stokes looked at him. Then, looked at the alley entrance. Then, back at Rhett. "Alternate route," Stokes said. "There is one," Rhett said. "But it goes through the northwest corner. Around the back of the water tower structure. Tighter. Less cover. But it comes out behind the staging position, not in front of it." Stokes thought for 3 seconds. In a real scenario, 3 seconds was a decision. He nodded. He got on comms. Redirected the element. Sent word to the perimeter teams to shift their positions to accommodate the new approach angle. This is where Marcus Dill's morning stopped being a training exercise and started being something else. The northwest corner route was tighter than even Rhett had suggested. The buildings on that side of the complex were older, part of the original construction, and 2 of them had partial wall collapses that had narrowed the passage between them to roughly 4 feet of navigable ground. 4 feet with full kit. 4 feet with a rifle at ready. 4 feet with the opposing force now adjusting, because opposing force cadres always adjust. They were not mannequins, they were seasoned trainers who could hear a radio call the same as anyone else. Dill's team of 4 was moving through that passage when the ceiling came in. Not actually, it was a training environment, the structures were maintained for safety, but a section of internal floor on the building to their right had been rigged with a Simonitian Claymore equivalent, a training device that deployed a spray of paint markers in a wide pattern when triggered. The cadre had repositioned and triggered it remotely. It hit 2 of Dill's Marines directly. Paint markers, not bullets, but the drill mandated that anyone hit in a vital zone was considered a casualty for the duration of the scenario. Both men went down according to the exercise rules. One of them, a lance corporal named Walsh, had taken a marker to the visor and had a brief real moment of disorientation before he got his bearings and understood that he was fine, just out of the scenario. Dill had 2 men left. And he was in a 4-foot passage between 2 buildings with a cadre element repositioning to cut off the far exit. He got on comms. "Corporal Dill, northwest passage. 2 down. 2 up. Cadre between me and the exfil point. I cannot push through and I cannot go back, they've closed the entry behind us. Static." Then, Stokes, copy, Dill. Hold position. Working it. Holding position in a 4-foot passage with 2 men against a repositioning cadre that knew exactly where you were and had already demonstrated they were willing to stage a secondary trigger was not a strategy. It was a way to run out the clock by getting systematically painted. Dill knew this. He also knew that the radio was going to tell him to hold and wait for the main element to fight its way through to him, which could take 8 minutes, during which time he would likely take 2 more simulated casualties and end up alone in a collapsing passage, which was going to look tremendously bad in the after-action review. What he did not know, and could not have predicted, was that the voice on comms 30 seconds later was not Stokes. Dill. Rhett's voice. Quiet on the radio, the same temperature as everything else. "I'm coming to you from the east side. There's a window breach on the building to your right. Ground floor. I need you to put suppressive fire on the cadre position at your exit while I come through." Dill looked at his remaining 2 Marines. Looked at the exit. Looked at the building to his right where there was indeed a ground floor window, old, wooden frame, boards across it, the kind of window that opened if you hit it with enough purpose. What's your ETA? Dill said. I'm already moving, Rhett said. There was no elaboration. No reassurance. No explanation of how Rhett had gotten out of the main element's movement to come back for a perimeter team that was not his responsibility. He had assessed the situation, identified what needed to happen, and was already in motion. Dill got his 2 Marines into position at the exit corner. They put fire on the cadre position, paint markers, simunition, controlled bursts at the angles where the cadre trainers were staged. It would not eliminate them. It would keep their heads down. Keep them from being able to move freely enough to prosecute. 20 seconds. 30. Dill was watching the building to his right and also watching the cadre position and also running through the math of how long 2 men could sustain suppressive fire against a prepared position, and the math was not optimistic. 50 seconds. The window blew open. Rhett came through it at a controlled velocity, not a diving movie entrance, but the specific practiced movement of a man who has breached through window frames enough times that his body knows the geometry of it without thinking. He landed, moved to the corner, assessed the cadre position in one look, and had his rifle up in less time than it takes to describe it. Move, he said to Dill. Not loud. Not commanding. The word of someone who has already seen the path. They moved. All 4 of them. Rhett leading. Dill covering rear. The cadre got 1 more simunition burst off and it caught Dill's right shoulder, paint, not a vital zone, so he stayed in the scenario, and then they were through the passage exit and into the open ground behind the staging position, which was exactly where they needed to be. The rest of the exercise resolved in the next 18 minutes. The main element hit the target building from the front. Rhett's breach through the northwest corner had repositioned the cadre's response, pulled their focus, and opened the angle that Stokes needed to push through. They extracted the notional HVT, hit the exfil corridor, and cleared the complex window with 2 minutes to spare on the clock. After-action review happened in the briefing structure at 1300. Hargrove walked through the scenario with the particular methodical pleasure of a man who loves taking things apart to see how they functioned. He hit the Northwest Passage problem directly, because it was the most instructive moment in the exercise. 2 casualties, isolated team, clock running. He asked Rhett to explain the decision to break off from the main element. Rhett said the perimeter team was going to lose 2 more men and, then, have 1 operator alone in a dead-end passage. That outcome was worse for the overall mission than the main element taking the target building with 1 less shooter. Hargrove asked, "How'd you know the window breach would work?" Rhett said, "I didn't. But the math on waiting was worse." Hargrove nodded. Wrote something on his board. Moved on. It was Dill who said something after. Not in the briefing room. Outside, after, while the element was breaking down kit in the equipment area. The heat had not relented. The flat white sky was still pressed down on everything. Somewhere on the far side of the complex, a cadre trainer was laughing at something. Dill walked over to where Rhett was cleaning his rifle. He stood there for a second, which for Dill was an unusual amount of time to stand somewhere without talking. "I owe you one," he said. His voice was different from the Chow Hall voice. Lower. Less architecture around it. The voice of a man speaking without an audience for the first time in a while. Rhett looked up. "Nope," he said. "That's how it works. You cover mine when it comes." Dill was quiet for another moment. Then, he said, "The other day. In the Chow Hall." Rhett set his rifle down. Looked at him. That was Dill stopped. Started again. "I was an ass. The thing I said about guys coming back not right. That was garbage and I knew it was garbage when I said it." Rhett looked at him for a long second. Not evaluating. Not waiting for more. "I know," he said. "I do that," Dill said. "I do it with new guys. I do it in new situations. I push until I find the edge of someone and, then, I use it." He was not performing the admission. He was not doing it for Ferris or Torres or anyone else. They were 20 feet away stripping gear and not listening. I think I do it because I need to know where I stand, and the way I learned to find that out was this way. He gestured vaguely, as if the gesture contained the entire chow hall scene and the 4 years before it. Rhett nodded. Slowly. You know what your problem is? Rhett said. Dill waited. You're actually good, Rhett said. Better than you need the noise for. I saw you in there today. You held your guys calm in a bad position. You assessed the cadre angle without being told to. You put fire where it needed to be on a 5-second briefing from someone you don't trust. He paused. You don't need the theater. It's costing you credibility with the guys who matter. Dill looked at him. The guys who matter are not impressed by the chow hall stuff, Rhett said. They're impressed by the passage. By today. He picked his rifle back up. Went back to cleaning it. Dill stood there for another moment. Then, he nodded, once, to himself rather than to Rhett, the nod of someone filing something in a place they planned to return to. He went back to his gear. They did not become close friends after that. They were not that kind of story, not the kind where two men clash and, then, become brothers with music underneath it and everything resolved neatly. They were on base together for 8 more days. They spoke when the work required it. They ran 2 more joint exercises and Rhett's reads were correct both times and Dill's instincts under pressure were exactly as good as Rhett had said they were, which was good enough that it did not need saying again. On the last day, before the SEALs transport out, Dill found Rhett in the equipment bay. He didn't say much. He offered his hand. Rhett took it. Firm grip, brief, the handshake of 2 men who understand what the week was and do not need to translate it into more words than it requires. That was it. But, back at his unit, over the following months, something about Dill shifted in ways that were not invisible. He was still loud. Still forceful. That was not going to change and did not need to, it was genuinely part of him and his guys needed it. But, the thing he had used as a weapon, the probing, the pushing at new guys, the performance of dominance as a diagnostic tool, that faded. It was replaced by something quieter and, considerably more useful, the habit of watching first. Of letting a man show you who he was before deciding what to do with the information. His junior Marines noticed before he did. Torres mentioned it to Ferris about 3 months later, in a way that was not a compliment and not a criticism but just an observation, Corporal's different since Lejeune. Ferris thought about it. Better, he said. Torres considered. Yeah. Which was not the whole story and could never be the whole story, because the whole story was a man sitting alone in a chow hall eating breakfast, and another man deciding that quiet was an invitation to a contest, and learning instead that quiet was a description. That the man who does not need to announce himself does not announce himself because he already knows what he is. That the loudest voice in the room and the most capable voice in the room are often 2 different voices, and that the distance between them is the exact length of a 4-foot corridor with 2 men down and the clock running. Rhett, for his part, never told the story. Not the chow hall version. Not the exercise version. Not the handshake at the end. He had 5 deployments and 200 better stories and a general indifference to the ones that were about him. If you had asked him 2 years later what he remembered about that joint rotation at Lejeune, he probably would have said the heat. Which was, in its own way, the whole point. The man who does not need the audience has no reason to keep the recording. He had just eaten breakfast. The rest of it was someone else's lesson to carry.